Hey everyone, it's Brian Beutler, publisher of Off Message. We are, as everyone watching probably knows, in the midst of escalating conflict between state governments and the federal government. We're also in the midst of a lesser conflict between citizens who are under attack by the federal government and their elected representatives. So I get questions from readers just about every week. Some of them are general, some of them are more specific, but they're along these lines, like, why aren't Democrats doing more? Or why don't our local and state police arrest the federal agents who are assaulting civilians? And I've wondered these kinds of things myself over the last several months. So I thought it would be useful to discuss it with someone who's sort of at the fulcrum of all of these conflicts. He's an elected Democrat. He's also a state law enforcement officer. And a big part of his job turns out to be finding the right way to approach these crises without either escalating into a danger zone or underreacting in a way that sort of breaks faith with constituents. So let's hear from him. It's California Attorney General Rob Bonta. How are you doing, man?
Hey, Brian, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk in some depth about a new initiative and some new guidance you've issued to Californians in response to the DHS killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. But can I pick your brain about a few national items first, because they pertain to the role and power of states vis-a-vis the federal government and regular citizens?
Yeah, sure.
It's flown a little bit under the radar relative to the actions of the Department of Homeland Security, but I take it that you saw the letter that Pam Bondi sent to Tim Walz and Jacob Fry, saying basically that if you want our masked agents off your streets, just hand over your state's voter rolls and nobody gets hurt. What did you make of that as a legal matter?
Let me just say first, very unbecoming of the United States Department of Justice to send such a letter, and completely on brand for this United States Department of Justice, which has really suffered massive reputational loss and earned that based on its political weaponization, prosecution of people on Trump's enemy list. And this is another example. It's essentially an extortion letter that it does have massive legal deficiencies in it. We're in court on the issues that she is talking about in her letter. She's asking that Minneapolis cease being a sanctuary city. That is already something that the law provides cities and states the opportunity to be, if that's what they want, pro-public safety, pro-community trust jurisdictions, where, of course, immigration enforcement officials can enforce the immigration laws if they wish, but they can't force and commandeer and conscript and draft into service states and local officials to do that. She's also asked for, as you mentioned, the voter roll information to be sent over. That's already being blocked in a court order. Also asking for SNAP and Medicaid data to be handed over. That is subject to litigation as well, where we are winning. So they take the L's in court. They first try to do the unlawful thing, get the voter information, get the Medicaid information, get the SNAP information, withhold funding if you don't, cease being a quote unquote sanctuary jurisdiction. They lose in court because we stand up for our rights and we get court orders. And now she's basically saying, we'll stop the metro surge, or at least draw it down. We'll stop the conditions, the conditions of reckless immigration enforcement agents, seemingly untrained, that led to 2 killings of your people. We'll cease that if you do all the things we're not lawfully entitled to, that you already have court orders and court decisions blocking us from. It's a remarkable letter, and the fact that she put it in writing, also remarkable. But they say the quiet part out loud all the time. This is how they operate. They operate with leverage and lawlessness, and this is another example.
My mind went to commandeering way before these ICE raids or these DHS raids, because I covered healthcare. And I remember the Supreme Court said, you can't force a state to implement a policy like Medicaid expansion that it doesn't want to implement it by threatening to take away its money. And I thought all Donald Trump does is threaten to take away states' money. And so eventually he's going to lose in court, but it's going to take a while, right? But just as beyond the question of constitutional law, if you received a letter like that, would you bank it as evidence of a crime?
I don't know if it's evidence of a crime. Certainly we would bank it as Exhibit A to any court proceeding, especially where there is an existing court order, and forcing the federal administration to do something or preventing them from doing something as an attempt to exercise an end run around that court order. Maybe contempt, maybe civil contempt, maybe criminal contempt, or we can move to enforce the order, or we might just want to give the court context as to how this lawless administration operates. A lot of courts are interested in information like this. They want to see that good faith or lack thereof that's expressed in these letters. And we see a lot of exasperated judges who are beside themselves. They're using language we're not used to seeing from judges because the conditions and the actions that they're seeing from the Trump administration are things we've never seen before. And so they say things that reflect the unprecedented lawless nature of what the Trump administration is doing. So I don't know if it's actually a crime, but it's certainly evidence of illegality, lack of bad faith, attempts to undermine a court order, ongoing attempts to exercise this fringe vision of a unitary executive that can do what it wants, when it wants. And yeah, they try to exert leverage all the time. And you're right, the anti-commandeering case law of the 10th Amendment prevents both actual commandeering and conscripting, actually using state resources and people from doing the job of the federal government, and we don't have to do their job for them, although they can do their job. And it also prevents the coercion, the heavy leverage that comes from conditioning funding on certain requirements for states that violate their 10th Amendment rights.
Yeah, I don't want to like make this like a law school clinic, but what would distinguish it from something like the call Donald Trump placed to Brad Raffensperger in 2021? I mean, he was asking for something different, right? Not the voter rolls, but to invent 11,000 whatever votes. And his threat was different, right? He was threatening prosecution. Here, she's asking you to do something that I think would not be lawful, like give us your voter rolls that are not supposed to be just handed out willy-nilly. And if you don't do it, we'll do something illegal, which is, like put a bunch of masked secret police in your state to be violent.
A couple of things. One, she's, and I don't want to make her case for her, there's nothing okay about this letter, but you're asking if it's a crime. She's basically making an offer for a deal. I mean, a heavily coerced one, while a city and a state is in pain, reeling from 2 killings from ICE agents, either of which could be murder, depending on what the investigation reveals. They're definitely killings, and they should be investigated fully to determine what criminality, if any, attaches to those acts. And she's saying, we'll remove the pain if you agree to do these things. And a party, a state could agree to do the things, even though they are unlawful requests. And some states do that. All of the states with red AGs, with Republican AGs, have sat on their hands and allowed the Trump administration to do these unlawful things, to strip away their voting rights, strip away their right to birthright citizenship, take away their funding, and just sat there and took it. So, and so like they're allowing it to happen. They didn't stand on their rights. They didn't go fight. They didn't go to court like the Democratic AGs do. So it's a really heavy-handed, highly leveraged request. It can be respectfully denied, which it will be, I'm very confident, by Minnesota and Minneapolis. But I'd have to see what the potential crime is, and there's always elements there. A state of mind, certain actions. There's I don't want to make it a law school class, but mens rea and actus reus. You need to have the state of mind, and you need to have the act. You need to have all the elements of the crime. You need to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in court. A very high standard, the highest standard, appropriately so, in our judicial and legal system. So not sure it's a crime, but definitely very inappropriate and potentially violating existing court orders.
So Democrats in Washington right now are grappling with what to demand in exchange for their votes to fund DHS. Do you have any input on what kinds of demands would actually help Californians? Like if you had Adam Schiff's job, what minimum concessions from Republicans would it take to make you feel comfortable voting yes?
Well, first of all, Adam Schiff does a great job at his job, and so does Senator Alex Padilla. I'm grateful to have 2 amazing U.S. senators representing my state and to be teaming up with them. We speak with some consistency. We're all on the same team, same page here, and the Democrats are doing exactly what they should be doing. And when you have the risk of a looming shutdown, it means something's not working, and Department of Homeland Security is not working. Everyone can see that. painfully with our own eyes, seeing all of the video from Minnesota, top example, but California, other places, these surges of masked, armed men acting overly aggressively, escalating, not de-escalating, seemingly untrained, creating conflict and traumatizing, terrorizing, racially profiling, as courts have found, not just me saying it. It's not working, and it needs to change. And so I think a drawdown, certainly in Minnesota, massive fundamental changes in practices. I would argue for a stronger accountability matrix. There's a civil cause of action that, because of U.S. Supreme Court decisions, has basically been defanged as a tool to hold federal officials accountable when they violate the civil rights of Americans, of individuals that they interact with. It's called a Bivens action, and Congress can, through statutory authority, just like they did with what are called 1983 claims that apply to local and state officers, they can create a clear pathway for seeking and, in appropriate circumstances, securing civil liability against federal officials, federal agents, when they violate the law, when they violate the civil rights of an individual. I'd include that because we need accountability. These agents, these federal agents, whether it be Border Patrol or ICE, are acting with impunity. They don't think they have accountability, and the Trump administration is backing them on that. J.D. Vance says you have absolute immunity. That is dangerous, reckless. It's wrong legally, like completely factually wrong and legally wrong. But for these individuals to go out into the field and interact with everyday people, with Americans, with Renee Good and Alex Pretty, and think they have no accountability for what they do, including shooting them dead, that's a very dangerous proposition. We have Todd Blanche sending my office a letter saying it is illegal and futile to try to hold federal agents accountable for crime. Complete misstatement of the law, gaslighting to the max. But that's what they do. And they put out these beliefs and these theories, and their followers adopt them. And then dangerous things happen, bad things happen, people get hurt, and people die.
Would changing the incentives that the ICE and CBP officers on the ground have, where they might think, I shouldn't escalate the violence here because I might commit a crime and then get in trouble, or I might violate someone's civil rights and get in trouble. Is that enough to prevent the next Minneapolis? Or would you need to go further in order to bring this administration into conformity with past practice in immigration enforcement, which has been elevated at times, even under Barack Obama, but was never like this?
Right. No, I don't want to suggest that my proposal is a complete solution. It's a partial solution. It's one aspect that I would push for, accountability. I'm thinking about it a lot. Criminal accountability. I think civil accountability is important. Accountability should be very uncontroversial. It should exist in every profession. My profession has it. The legal profession, every profession should have it. When you don't have accountability, that's when you have problems. So, but it's one aspect of money. I think we need a drawdown in just numbers and volume and funding. Like this sort of pulling away of billions of dollars in funding from healthcare and driving it into the largest ICE operation in the history of the United States, and seeing them deployed on American soil against Americans, where people are dying and people are getting hurt and people are getting profiled and people are subject to excessive force and false arrest and unlawful detentions. Why are taxpayer dollars funding that? They need to reduce the funding, reduce the deployments, the number of the forces, increase training, so that and experience and supervision and internal accountability, where they should be required to investigate when there is a death. That is common sense. And the fact that they immediately said when Renee Good was shot dead that they wouldn't investigate and started calling her a domestic terrorist, outrageous. So there's so many things that need to change. Accountability is one, funding is another. Just the volume of the deployment, training, supervision, internal investigations, accountability, the list goes on.
So the ICE budget is somewhat frozen in place. So even if DHS funding lapses, it won't necessarily affect operations. And so I guess the idea is that the collateral pain from things like airline disruptions or emergency management outages and so on, along with like obviously the overwhelming weight of public opinion against these raids, will ultimately force the administration to implement some kind of concessions. Are you comfortable with that proposition? Like, is the idea okay, if you're not going to concede anything, then the rest of this agency is just going to not have any money from here on out?
I'm okay with that. I'll let. I mean, the Democrats and the senators and Congress people need to make the decision for themselves. They're elected to do a job, but I like the idea of holding firm on a principle and standing up for the people who are crying out for change in this space and demanding it, and for the Democrats to have an opportunity to channel the voices of the people that elected them and that they represent and that they're fighting for, and to miss an opportunity to make the change. I think that would be a missed opportunity, and something that the people don't deserve. They deserve better. So I like the fight here. I like standing on principle. 10 toes down and holding firm and strong on this issue and demanding change. There's a lot of creative ways in negotiation you can get to what you are seeking and what the American people deserve. So I'm not going to predetermine exactly what has to happen 1,000% no matter what, but there needs to be fundamental change in how Department of Homeland Security is operating. It could be commitments to decrease funding in the future. It could be a recommitment to do the thing they said ICE and immigration enforcement were going to do originally, which is go after violent criminals, not kill Alex Pretty or Renee Good. Are you kidding me? Like, go do the thing you said. And there's a lot of people that support that, focusing on violent criminals. But it's been a bait and switch, just like so many other things, where they say one thing and do another. And the people of this country are smart, and they see what's happening, and they see the gap and the delta between the stated position and the actions on the ground, and they want something different. So I think this is a moment for the Democrats to hold firm.
So one way or another, there's going to be more DHS deployments, right? Because even if the shutdown lasts forever, ICE is well funded. They've already done one surge in Los Angeles, and obviously I'm guessing they're still operating all over the state. So Trump could send a ton of mass agents back to basically any city he decided he wanted to harangue in California. So what's your message to Californians about how they should respond if that happens, and what they should do if federal operations in California continue to be as lawless as they've been in Minneapolis and elsewhere?
Yeah, first I'll say, as the California Attorney General, the chief law officer of this state, it's my job to be ready, to be prepared, to have a plan, to see what's happening in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and consider the same thing happening here and know what I'm going to do. And so that's what I'm thinking about. I've been thinking about that day and night over the last few weeks, having seen the tragedy and the pain and the lawlessness of the Trump administration all happening in real time. I was watching it with other Americans in Minnesota. So a couple things. One, we've already weeks ago opened up a portal called oag.ca.gov/report misconduct, where we've invited Californians to do exactly that: report misconduct of federal agents, of ICE agents, Border Patrol agents engaged in unlawful detentions or unlawful arrests or excessive force or improper seizures or not having a judicial warrant when they need one, or potentially killing. Also, with respect to the National Guard and Marines, which we've been able to push them out because the federalized National Guard and Marines, after 6 months of fighting tooth and nail, but there was a time when they were on the ground and we wanted reports about potential violations of the Posse Comitatus Act, military personnel unlawfully involved in civilian law enforcement. So first, we want Californians to participate in making sure that California is treated lawfully and that all Californians are safe. They can send us information, we'll assess it, and we can decide whether a crime has been committed and whether we should take action. I also, because of the gaslighting from the Trump administration and their position on full display manifested in Minnesota, where they have taken a position that that there is essentially absolute immunity for federal agents, where local and state prosecutors cannot investigate or prosecute a federal agent for committing a crime against the people of that state on that state soil, because they have taken that position and acted on it. We felt it was necessary to provide guidance to all our local law enforcement agencies, which we did earlier this week. And we reminded them and reaffirmed and reasserted, and many didn't need reminding. They know very well what their authority is. But given the confusion created by the federal administration, that chaos, I wanted to provide clarity and certainty to our state and local law enforcement that, of course, if a federal agent kills a Californian on California soil, murders them, commits a crime, criminally victimizes them, we, of course, have a right to investigate. And if the facts support it, to prosecute. It's new guidance on old, longstanding law. The law has not changed. This has always been true. But given the gaslighting by the federal administration, we wanted to reassert and reaffirm this truth in our legal system and make sure everyone was on the same page.
And so the portal is essentially a tool then to bank evidence for future prosecutions potentially.
Yeah.
And does it have the capability for like video upload and
all that? Awesome. I mean, mostly that. I mean, that's among the best evidence we can receive. So we're asking for videos, photos, documents, witness statements, names and numbers of people who want to talk more about what they saw as third-party witnesses or victims of a potential crime. And not everyone knows what the elements of a crime are, what's a crime, but they know what's wrong and what feels like abuse and mistreatment at the hands of a federal agent. So they can share that with us, and we have the legal expertise in-house to assess the evidence that they share with us.
So let's say you bank indisputable evidence of an ICE or CBP officer committing a felony while on the job. Would the idea be to charge him in the normal course of things, or is the idea to wait for a new federal administration? Like, what is your thinking about things like statutes of limitations versus like they shepherd the guys out of state? Would you need the marshals to cooperate? And if so, what do you have to wait until the marshals are under a law-abiding president before you charge? I mean, how does that work just as a practical matter?
I mean, our goal is to follow standard practices as if a federal agent is any other perpetrator of a crime against a Californian, and arrest them. But this is assuming we already have enough through our investigation and our fact gathering to conclude that there's a crime and we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in court. Charge them and move through the legal process. They might take a plea. We might have to go to trial. Who knows? And yes, so nothing special. Just do what we always do when a crime is committed against a Californian, and they might be released. They might be held in custody. But you're pointing out something that I want to focus on as well, which is the federal government could make things difficult. I'm not assuming they will. I'm not naive that they might not. But normally, the federal government works with state and local jurisdictions. And if there's one of their agents did something beyond their official duties and committed a crime and hurt a Californian or an American or someone else in another state, they would be cooperating with that. They would make that person available. They would make sure that justice is done. They would share evidence, share information, and make sure that the legal process occurs and accountability, if needed, is provided. But maybe they move the person out of state. Then we would need to start extradition proceedings and request that person be brought here to face justice in the state where they committed the crime. Maybe they would not want to share evidence. We're seeing that in Minnesota. That's not a made-up issue. So maybe we'd have to go to court to have a court order the federal government not to destroy evidence, to preserve it. A remarkable proposition that a court has to order the federal government not to destroy evidence, potential evidence of a crime. But that's where we are today. We might have to ask a court to order the federal government to provide the evidence to local or state prosecutors. So there's a lot of different scenarios. I don't want to prejudge what might happen. I hope that the federal government does what it has done in the past, which is cooperate with local and state jurisdictions. But I realize there's, we've seen lack of cooperation and a lack of, which has created a lack of trust from local and state prosecutors in the ability of the federal government to actually cooperate and participate in a joint investigation and to share evidence when needed by local and state prosecutors.
So I mentioned this at the top, but I get a lot of frustrated questions from readers who are thinking, like we pay our state and local police to keep us safe. The federal agents who have invaded our states or whatever are making us much less safe. And they're often doing it in illegal ways. So why won't our police come help us? Not in a future prosecution, but in the moment. And I think you and I discussed this when we met last year. That there's a federal preemption issue, but then there's also this sort of prudential concern that you really don't want to end up in a situation where armed agents of any state and armed agents of the federal government start shooting guns at each other. But has your thinking on how kinetic state and local cops should be changed at all over the months since, I think it was June when we met, Chicago, New Orleans, and Minneapolis have happened since then, and each one seems more extreme than the last. The question of whether state and local police should be rendering like assistance to civilians on the street when they see masked ICE agents committing crimes against them.
Yes, and let me first answer a question from your prior question that I didn't get to, and also make a comment. You made a comment earlier about the court process moving slow. Sometimes it moves super fast. So we can get restraining orders within hours, at times, same day, hours later. So to get to a final conclusion in a case, it does take time, but there are parts that move very, very fast and in very important ways, like blocking unlawful conduct that has widespread potential impact and pain. We can stop that quickly. So just wanted to make that point. You also asked about the statutes of limitations. Mm-hmm. Our goal is always to seek justice as quickly as possible and to have as small a period of time between the crime and the accountability. That's our goal. Now, the federal government could make that tougher if that's what they decided to do. And some actions have no statute of limitations, like murder. And there could be accountability later. My hope is that we get the accountability quickly, thoroughly, comprehensively, and making sure that we have all the facts and that we're doing our job appropriately, going where the facts and law take us, but not waiting until another administration. But for if the statute of limitations allows, or there's no statute of limitations, when there's a new federal government that may be more cooperative, if that's what actually happens, and the evidence can all be presented, and there's still the ability within the statute of limitations to charge, that's also possible. So accountability at any time is important, but I always want to seek it as close in time to the unlawful conduct. I think it's good for public trust. It's good for just appropriate deterrence and for many other reasons. Now, for local law enforcement on the ground, this is tricky, and we're in so many unprecedented spaces because of the unprecedented way this federal administration is acting. This hasn't been an issue as prominently in the past, but it is now. And if a federal agent criminally victimizes a Californian in California, and there's a local law enforcement who witnesses it, who sees it, who's on scene, and this is an on view criminal action, yeah, they should act. It could escalate quickly if the federal agent has other federal agents with them or supervisors with them who feel that the local law enforcement officer can't arrest or doesn't have jurisdiction. And we definitely want to de-escalate and not avoid conflict in those situations. We don't want to use words only, no physical altercations, of course. And if necessary, I think the solution is go to court to get a court order, get someone who's going to tell the parties that see this differently what the rules are, who has jurisdiction. And I think that the court would find in our favor because, of course, if a federal agent commits a crime, especially, in the presence of a local law enforcement officer, that there can be and should be accountability. There's no such thing as a license to kill Californians by federal agents, a license to criminally victimize Californians on California soil by federal agents, and that they have carte blanche to do that whenever they want to whoever they want. That's not true. That's not what the law requires. But it is tricky. That was part of our guidance that we provided today. For example, we wanted to make sure that local law enforcement, if they're first on the scene of a potential crime, a suspected crime by a federal agent against a Californian, they can hold the scene. They don't need to give up the scene to the federal government. If the federal government says, we'd like to take over, they don't have to defer or stand down. We hold the scene. We keep the evidence. We control the scene. We'll share the scene if the federal government wants to share and cooperate, and they're going to exercise their concurrent jurisdiction over the potential crime. But if they're going to try to push local or state law enforcement away from a crime scene and then do nothing, not investigate, sit on the evidence, keep the evidence from local or state government, that's not happening, and that should not happen. So we wanted to provide some clarity there.
Would your assessment of striking this balance, of how to strike this balance, change if a few months down the road you had reason to believe that federal agents were deployed to make it impossible for, say, certain counties to administer elections, or for citizens who might not be white or might not speak English to feel safe voting? Like, they might be thinking, I can't go out because I could be Kavanaugh stopped at any moment, and so now they don't get to vote. How does elections change your thinking about the proper role of state and local police in getting between civilians and these federal agents, so that you can get a court order, but election day is one day, or obviously there's early voting and stuff like that. But you could end up with a lot of people disenfranchised if they're not protected, I would think.
Yeah, it's possible. And we've thought about that scenario, and we're concerned about that. Election integrity as we approach very important elections in June and November this year are critical. And we want people to be able to have faith that they can safely participate in the election process, the voting process, that they in the franchise, and that their vote will be counted. So in California, we have 30 days of voting. We have universal vote by mail. If you never want to go to a polling station, you don't have to. You can fill out your ballot at home and pop it in your own mailbox or the mailbox on the corner, and your vote is official, and it'll be counted. You can vote early at polling stations if you wish. We have drop boxes all over, besides specifically for ballots, in addition to the ability to use the U.S. mail. And so that's always been California's approach: bring the franchise closer to the voters, remove the obstacles, make it easy to vote. Democracies thrive when more people participate. So take away the barriers. A single day of voting where people could get sick, or it could be raining, or they have to go to work, or they have some unexpected emergency in their family, makes it harder to vote. But yes, we have analyzed, we've looked at, we've been concerned about the possibility of ICE agents, National Guard, military of other types being at or near polling stations when Californians are trying to vote. And there's already a federal law in place that prohibits that prohibits armed agents, armed military, armed people from being at or near polling stations. So the law of our own federal government, our federal law already prohibits that. Will that stop them? Who knows? It's up to them. Maybe not. We're not naive about it. Voter suppression, undermining the right to vote, has been part of the approach of this administration. So it's possible. So we have basically court papers where all we got to do is dot the I's, cross the T's, press print, and file in court, where we could get a court order, presumably within minutes or hours, ordering the dispersal of armed personnel from polling stations, because that's exactly what the law requires: clear, certain, no ambiguity. So we have a plan for that particular scenario.
Does the plan involve, is there a contingency plan for if you get the order that you feel you're entitled to, and these agents say, okay, enforce it?
We have always thought about where the rubber would meet the road if a court order is flouted. And fortunately, in the cases that we've brought as Democratic attorneys general, Trump administration has been following them. In 55 cases where we've won 80% of the time, where we've protected $188 billion of funding that Congress appropriated that Trump tried to block, where we protected constitutional rights, where we pushed out the unlawfully federalized and deployed National Guard. Trump follows the court orders in our cases. Will there be a time when he doesn't? There could be a time. And so, that creates a tricky situation. Usually, there are court marshals and bailiffs that can help ensure that orders are followed. I don't know how that would play out in a situation where we're in the street and polling stations. There could certainly be an opportunity for state officials to provide information to voters who don't want to enter a polling station because of armed people about how else they can vote. Places where there aren't armed folks, where they can drop off a ballot or a polling station where it is safe and there are no armed individuals. It's a terrifying and sickening situation to consider, but consider it we must, given this federal administration. I think military at one polling station. I think that given all the ways people can vote in California and all the other places and methods for voting, if that's what the federal administration decides to do, I think there's ways for the votes to still be counted. Although there could be a chilling effect, and that's wrong. That's a problem. And the federal government should be following court orders, and so far they have.
Okay, last question. Another thing we discussed back in New Orleans was tax protesting. The logistics of withholding federal tax dollars, so long as Trump is depriving blue states of their rightful distribution or using the federal dollars to engage in acts of oppression like he's been doing. So have you and Gavin, or you and the other AGs kicked around that idea at all since then? Is it like a hard no that would be a nonviolent form of escalation, given that we're seeing that civil disobedience on the street with whistles and cell phone cameras has proved so effective?
The governor has raised it again since we spoke back in June. So I know it's on his mind. I think he tweeted about it again, and we hear this all the time. I hear this all the time from my constituents. They don't understand how we can be a donor state, provide so much funding to the federal government, send it to DC figuratively or literally, and then it at least the part that we're owed, we don't want all of it back. We know that it's an appropriate role for the fourth largest economy in the world that's done well as part of the United States of America to help other states that might need it, and that's what it means to be a United States. But we want our part. We want our share. We want our SNAP funding and Medi-Cal. Medicaid funding and housing funding, and when Trump has tried to withhold that, we've been able to block him. Broadly speaking, half of the cases of the 55 have been about him trying to improperly withhold funding. But the fundamental unfairness of it is not lost on anyone, and that's why this comes up all the time. Why are we giving our money to the federal government and then they're not giving us the part that we deserve? It's wrong, and this is part of the blatant and just brazen politicization of the conduct and actions of the Trump administration. He goes after blue cities, he goes after blue states. He makes no bones about it. The ones that didn't vote for him, he's going after Minnesota because he won the vote there, he says, and they deprived him of that vote multiple times. I think he said he won it 3 times. I mean, it's this guy that's he's the aggrieved person in his own imagination. But it's hard. I think we discussed this before. Like this requires massive, disciplined, collective action, because federal taxes are paid. California literally by millions of individuals and corporations in millions of moments where they file on their own, and their tax dollars are already withheld through withholdings, and then they pay more if necessary if the withholdings aren't enough. And they're not sent to Sacramento first and to some big bucket that can be withheld. So there's as Americans do what we do so well in appropriate moments, and what Minnesotans are doing in such an inspiring way, which is identify ways to speak up, to speak out, to protest, to push back, whether it's whistles or horns. Maybe this will reemerge as an action, but it's each person who does it also puts themselves in jeopardy. If the federal government wanted to be hard-lined about it, they could go after folks for failing to pay their taxes as well. But maybe being arrested and putting yourself in harm's way is part of the protest. That's happened in the past in this country.
Would you give us a glimpse behind the curtain? Have you brainstormed this with other AGs maybe, or are there any ideas that you've heard floated to get around these logistical difficulties, or is it basically same situation as it was back in 2025 when we first spoke?
There's ongoing thinking about it. AGs, it comes up all the time. AGs are hearing it from their constituents. Legislators are approaching me about it. They want to have a bill on this issue, and they're looking for guidance. I think I mentioned to you, I spoke to the iconic Erwin Chemerinsky about this issue when I was a legislator in Trump 1.0, and I was thinking about this issue. So it's going to continue to come up. I haven't cracked the code on this one. No secrets behind the curtain about some pathway to do it. I'm sure there's some smart person who has an idea that might work, but I haven't seen a concrete pathway that could happen at scale without any potential exposure to those involved. But we're in unprecedented territory where unprecedented things happen. So I have not taken it off the table that this might be something that happens someday.
All right. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with us. And thank you for just putting your mind to tough questions like those. That's California Attorney General Rob Bonta. Rob Bonta, again, thank you for spending time with our readers.
Thanks, Brian. Really great to be with you. Thank you.